Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Colton, and in today's video, I want to give my initial thoughts and impressions on the Olympus Omd Em10 Mark III. So this is a camera that I picked up a few months ago. I've been using it extensively throughout that time, and I wanted to talk about why I bought this camera in the first place, what my hopes and dreams for it were, and then also what my experience has been now having used it for anyone who's interested in picking up one of these cameras, or also who are maybe interested in the difference between a more modern day Olympus camera and a older DSLR style camera from Olympus. So that is one of the big reasons why I picked up this camera, was because I was using the Olympus E300 and E500 for a lot of my still lives here in the studio, shooting various candies and even for some portraits. And those cameras are great. They have really wonderful color science, but they're not the most user-friendly. And especially in the studio, there are some situations that arose where it was really challenging to use those cameras. The LCDs are locked onto the back of the camera, so no adjustment there. They're also not terribly accurate. They're fairly small, so they're not really that helpful when you're trying to determine if you nailed focus, if you got the composition exactly how you want it. Certainly not if you're getting the color temperature and colors accurately. So I really wondered, like, if I picked up a more modern day Olympus camera with all of those benefits of a more modern day camera, would I still get the color science that I'm looking for? So that was a big question and a big desire in picking up this camera. And then also, I travel a lot and I make videos when I'm out traveling, but I also take a lot of photos. And so I've been bringing 2, sometimes 3 or more cameras. But I always bring this camera, which is the Sony a6400, for any kind of video stuff that I'm doing or making or shooting. And sometimes I shoot pictures on it, but I'm never in love with the photos that I take, which is why a lot of times I'll bring the Olympus E500, because I love the colors out of that camera so much more. And it's not exactly the smallest camera. The lens aren't exactly the smallest. So altogether, it's a pretty heavy photography load just for those two, let alone sometimes I'll bring a Instax camera and a point and shoot camera, and it just gets pretty full in there. So the other side of it was wondering, this camera does 4K. If the colors are great, if it does 4K, can I use it for video and also photo while I'm out traveling and just have one camera to use instead of 2 separate cameras? So that was sort of my thoughts into purchasing this camera. And ultimately, I wasn't going to pull the trigger, but this camera, this particular one, had been on Facebook Marketplace for a while, and the price kept going down and kept going down. And so eventually I said, you know what? I'm going to throw out an even lower offer and see if it gets accepted. And it did. And it was just too good a price to pass up, especially because curiosity was really gnawing at me and I wanted to know how that color science compared. I do have a video, if you're curious, where I compare the color science between the E500 and this Omd Em10 Mark III. So that's on my channel if you want to check that out. Now I've used this camera for probably 3 or 4 months pretty intensely, and I wanted to share some initial thoughts about how it's been and have I been able to achieve the hopes that I had when I purchased this camera. So I'll start out with the still lives, and I'll say that when shooting those, I have been really impressed with the results, and most likely I will be using this camera much more often for those types of shoots. So all the candy shots that I've been doing, the colors are very, very similar between this old Olympus camera that I was using, the E500, and now this newer Olympus camera that I'm using. And so it's like I'm getting the benefits of the older camera, but I get the more user-friendly aspect in terms of the viewfinder and the LCD screen and like just some of those updates. So for any sort of still lives, I'll probably be using this camera much more frequently. There's also a bit of a resolution boost, which was never really a problem on the older cameras, but is probably a nice to have in case I do want to print a little bit bigger than I've printed in the past. So on that side, a check mark for, the still lives and sort of the in-studio experience using this camera. Now, as far as the travel side of things go, I can say that this camera for photos works pretty much just as well, if not even better than the E500. It's definitely easier to see if I got a good shot in bright sunlight because this LCD is a lot better, and the viewfinder, I can review the photos. It's not just an optical viewfinder. So practical uses definitely are there, but also the colors look great. I probably could stand to pick up a zoom lens that's a little more similar to the quality of the one I have on the E500, but otherwise I'm very satisfied with the experience shooting it as a still camera. So as far as video is concerned, this camera fell short of my already low expectations. And it's unfortunate because it excels in so many other places, but video, it really fails, and it fails pretty hard. There are a few specific reasons why it fails for me personally. There's also one case where it really excelled for me personally, but the first of the reasons why it doesn't work as a video camera in my case is that there's no external microphone input for this camera, meaning that if you want to use a lavalier mic or an external shotgun mic, anything like that, you'll have to record it onto an external audio recorder and then sync up the audio in post. Not a big deal. I've done it a million times. I knew that going into this, so it was more of a maybe annoyance or nuisance than really a game breaker. When I shoot with the A6400, I do plug in a wireless lav mic, and that just basically syncs the audio at the time of the recording and saves me a step later on. But I'm no stranger to syncing audio, so I knew I would have to do that with this camera. And so for me, it wasn't a game breaker, but it was a nuisance. I know for other people that might be a deal breaker. The bigger deal breaker is that obviously I film myself a lot of the times. This camera does not have a flip out screen or a flip up screen or a flip down screen, anything like that. So you can't see yourself when you're recording, which obviously can be a pretty big problem. If you spend a bunch of time recording, review the footage and find out that half of your head is cut off or you're sitting awkward, whatever. There is an app that this camera has where you can see yourself, and you can actually start and stop the recording, but it will only do it in 1080p. I don't understand why it won't still let you film in 4K, but it will downgrade you to 1080p if you do that method. And the latency or the delay of lag in what you do versus when it shows you on the screen is pretty severe, so it's not a pleasant experience to use. And I think more game breaking for me in that regard is that I'm going to shoot it in 4K. So if it can't do it in 4K, then it's not really going to be usable. Now you might say, okay, you can manually focus on something and then go remove that object and sit in the exact same spot. In my experience, if you're filming yourself, it never really works out and you're always still out of focus a little bit. If I'm filming someone else, then that's actually what I will do is, focus on them, get locked in manually, and that way the camera's not going to adjust while we're filming the interview. But if you're filming yourself, it just never quite works out. Now this camera does have tracking, so you can set it to track your face, and then that way if you move forward or you move back, the camera is going to adjust focus. The problem isn't that feature, it's that this camera has the worst autofocus. The autofocus is accurate, it's pretty quick, but it's only contrast detect, which means in practical use that the camera is going to put the image totally out of focus, go through, hit focus, go past focus, back out of focus again, and then it'll know exactly where the focus should be, and it'll then lock it into the proper focus. And that happens pretty quick, but it's also very noticeable. You'll just like see the image totally go out of focus and then back in. And if you're in a scene where things are changing, like you're filming yourself and you're moving around, or whatever, then it's constantly shooting in and out of focus, and it just ruins the footage completely. So if you're shooting, whether it's yourself or someone else, you really have to either only shoot in manual focus or do autofocus, lock the focus, and then hit record, and then stop the recording to re-get focus again. So it's just, the autofocus is just not usable really in any kind of use case that I would use. And that makes the video basically not usable, which is really unfortunate because it is in 4K. The 4K is nice and sharp. And there is one feature that this camera excels at, which is image stabilization. This camera has such good image stabilization that it almost looks like you're using a Steadicam in some cases. And that's a major difference than my A6400, which has 0 in-body image stabilization and looks like you're in an earthquake if you're holding the camera and walking around or panning or whatever. I tried to use the A6400 when I was in Colorado on the hike, and 90% of the footage I used, even though I was holding the camera as still as I possibly could, still ended up looking like I was in the middle of a major earthquake. Whereas with this camera, you're panning, you're walking, you're doing whatever, and it does a phenomenal job of making that look nice and smooth. So it actually could be a great vlogging camera if it had autofocus that was actually any good. And unfortunately it doesn't. So for the video side of things, it kind of boils down to like, if I'm not using the A6400, I need like a second camera to get B-roll. I'm just going to use my cell phone. Honestly, it shoots in 4K also. It has better stabilization, and this thing, the focus is just not usable. But other than that, and outside of the video side of things, I will definitely still be using this camera for all of the still lifes that I'm shooting. I'll probably bring it if I'm shooting portraits on film and I just want an extra camera to shoot some digital versions. And then definitely if I'm out on a hike with friends, going to a nightclub, a party, walking around downtown, whatever, I'll definitely be bringing this camera because it's super compact, it takes great photos, and I paid so little for it that if it got broken or beer spilt on it, drops on a rock, whatever, I really don't have much to be sad about because I didn't pay really much to get it in the first place. So that's the video for today. If you enjoyed it, please do give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button. That'll keep you in the loop for when the next video drops. But for now, I'm Colton, and I'll see you in the next one.